You know that feeling when your stomach drops because you just remembered a bill you forgot about? That split second of panic where your brain frantically calculates whether you can cover it without your checking account going negative? I used to get that feeling 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week. And the weirdest part wasn't the stress itself. It was how much mental real estate that stress occupied, how it colonized every quiet moment, every decision, every conversation about the future. My name is Nick, and for years I thought financial stress was just part of being an adult, like taxes or back pain. Something you complained about, but ultimately accepted as the price of participation in modern life. Then something shifted, and I realized I'd been operating under a fundamentally broken assumption about what money actually does. Most people think money buys things: cars, houses, vacations, security, and sure, on a surface level, that's technically true. But what I discovered is that money's real function, its actual superpower, is that it buys brain space. It purchases mental bandwidth. And when you don't have enough of it, you're not just broke financially. You're broke cognitively. You're running your entire life on a processor that's maxed out, with half your RAM dedicated to a background anxiety program you can't close. Let's talk about what financial stress actually does to your brain. Because this isn't some abstract psychology concept. This is measurable, documented, terrifying neuroscience. There's a study from Princeton that I think about constantly. Researchers found that when you're worried about money, when you're in that state of active financial scarcity, your effective IQ drops by 13 points. 13. That's the equivalent of losing a full night's sleep, except you don't get to recover by sleeping it off. You're just walking around operating at significantly diminished capacity, making decisions about your life and your future with a handicapped brain. Think about what that means in practice. You're trying to figure out whether to take the higher paying job with the longer commute or the lower paying job closer to home. But you can't think clearly because part of your brain is running calculations about whether you can afford your car insurance renewal next month. You're trying to decide if you should go back to school, invest in a certification, take a risk on a side business, but you can't focus on the strategic long-term analysis because you're mentally juggling which bills you can delay without getting hit with late fees. This is the poverty trap that nobody talks about. Not the mathematical trap where you can't afford the good boots, so you buy cheap boots repeatedly. That's real, but this is deeper. This is the trap where financial stress makes you dumber, which makes you make worse decisions, which creates more financial stress, which makes you even dumber. It's a cognitive death spiral. And here's what really bothers me. Society looks at people in this spiral and says they're bad with money, undisciplined, impulsive, making poor choices. But imagine trying to solve complex problems while someone is screaming in your ear 24/7. That's what financial stress is. It's a constant scream in the background of your consciousness. Can you afford this? What if the car breaks down? What if you get sick? What about next month? What about next year? You're not making bad decisions because you're bad at decisions. You're making bad decisions because you're trying to make decisions while being mentally held underwater. I remember the exact moment I understood this on a personal level. I was at a coffee shop trying to work on a project that could have genuinely improved my career trajectory. Something that required deep focus, creative thinking, strategic planning. And I sat there for 90 minutes staring at my laptop, accomplishing absolutely nothing because my brain kept drifting to the fact that I had $340 in my checking account and rent was due in 9 days and I hadn't been paid yet. I couldn't think about the future because I was too busy trying to solve the present. That's when it clicked. I wasn't failing to plan for the long term because I was short-sighted or lazy. I was failing to plan for the long term because I literally didn't have the cognitive resources available to do it. All my processing power was allocated to immediate survival. And you can't build a cathedral when you're spending all your energy making sure the foundation doesn't collapse. But here's where this gets interesting, and this is the part that changed everything for me. The research shows that it's not actually the amount of money that determines your stress level. It's the buffer. It's the gap between what you have and what you need. Two people can make the exact same salary and have wildly different stress levels depending on their expenses, their obligations, their safety margin. Someone making $45,000 with $2,000 in savings and manageable expenses can be exponentially less stressed than someone making $85,000 with no savings and high fixed costs. Because stress isn't about wealth. Stress is about volatility. It's about whether an unexpected $600 expense is an inconvenience or catastrophe, whether a bad month means rearranging some plans or facing eviction. This completely reframes what financial success actually means. We're obsessed with income. How much do you make? What's your salary? Did you get the raise? But income is only half the equation. The other half is stability, predictability, the presence of a cushion between you and disaster. And this is where most financial advice goes completely sideways. They tell you to invest, build wealth, think long term, all of which is correct eventually. But if you're currently in the cognitive death spiral, if your brain is running at diminished capacity because you're constantly worried about making it to Friday, telling you to think about retirement is like telling someone who's drowning to focus on their swimming technique. The advice isn't wrong, it's just catastrophically mistimed. The first step out of financial stress isn't building wealth, it's building the buffer, that first chunk of money that sits between you and panic. Because that money doesn't just sit in your bank account, it sits in your brain, freeing up processing power. It removes the scream from the background. And when that happens, when you're no longer operating in constant survival mode, everything shifts. Not just financially, your entire relationship with decisions, with time, with possibility transforms in ways that are hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it. I experienced this shift firsthand about 3 years ago. I had finally scraped together $1,500 and stuck it in a savings account. I promised myself I wouldn't touch unless something actually broke. The weirdest thing happened. Within 2 weeks, I noticed I was sleeping better, not because anything in my life had objectively changed. Same job, same apartment, same beat-up car making the same concerning noise, but my nervous system had downshifted. The constant low-grade anxiety that had been my baseline for years, the thing I thought was just my personality, turned out to be a rational response to genuine instability. The moment I had a thin barrier between me and catastrophe, my body stopped treating every day like a crisis. I started making better decisions almost immediately, not because I suddenly became smarter or more disciplined, but because I had the bandwidth to actually think. I started meal prepping because I could afford to buy groceries in bulk. I fixed the small leak under my sink before it became a big leak. I compared insurance rates and saved $40 a month. None of these actions required heroic willpower. They just required a brain that wasn't constantly screaming about survival. This is what psychologists call moving from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. But those terms make it sound philosophical, almost spiritual. It's not. It's neurological. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and rational decision-making, functionally shuts down under chronic stress. You're not thinking poorly because you're bad at thinking. You're thinking poorly because your hardware is being throttled by your operating system's panic mode. So let's talk about building the buffer, because this is where theory meets actual tactical application. The number everyone throws around is $1,000, and honestly, they're not wrong. $1,000 is enough to handle most common emergencies without derailing your entire financial life. Flat tire, broken phone, minor medical issue, unexpected bill. It won't cover everything, but it covers the majority of the chaos that keeps people trapped. But here's what nobody tells you about saving that first $1,000. It's going to take longer than you think, and it's going to be harder than it should be, because you're trying to save money while simultaneously paying the poverty premium on everything else. You're buying the single roll of paper towels because you can't afford the 12-pack. You're paying overdraft fees. You're stuck in the expensive cycle while trying to save your way out of it. It's like trying to dig yourself out of a hole while someone keeps throwing dirt back in. The math is brutal. If you can save $50 a week, which is genuinely difficult for someone living paycheck to paycheck, it'll take you 20 weeks to hit $1,000. That's 5 months. 5 months of saying no to everything, of feeling like you're making no progress, of watching your friends go out while you stay home eating rice and beans for the 4th night in a row. And this is assuming nothing goes wrong during those 5 months. No car trouble, no emergency vet bill, no surprise expense that wipes out 3 weeks of progress in an afternoon. This is why most people never build the buffer. Not because they don't understand it's important. They absolutely do. But because the path to get there feels impossible when you're already operating at maximum capacity. You're being asked to find money that doesn't exist while paying premium prices for everything because you don't have money. It's a paradox that breaks people. I watched my sister try to save an emergency fund 4 separate times. Each time she'd get to around $400, something would break, the money would disappear, and she'd be back at zero. And each time the psychological damage was worse than the financial damage, because it wasn't just losing the money. It was losing the hope that she could ever get ahead. After the 4th time, she stopped trying, just accepted that she'd always be one bad Tuesday away from disaster. That acceptance is what the system banks on. Literally, financial institutions make billions from people who've given up on building a buffer. Overdraft fees, payday loans, credit card interest, these aren't bugs in the system. They're features, they're the toll you pay for being broke. And that toll ensures you stay broke. It's a beautifully designed trap, but let's say you manage it. Let's say through some combination of side hustles, cutting expenses to the bone, selling stuff you don't need, and maybe catching one lucky break, you hit that $1,000 mark. What actually happens? First, you'll probably feel nothing. I remember hitting $1,000 and thinking, that's it? This is supposed to change my life? Because in the moment, it doesn't feel like much. It's not enough to quit your job. It's not enough to make a down payment on anything meaningful. It's just a number in an account. But then something breaks. Your laptop dies, or your phone screen shatters, or your car needs new brakes. And instead of that sick feeling in your stomach, instead of the panic spiral of figuring out which bill you can skip or which credit card still has room, you just handle it. You transfer the money, you fix the thing, and your buffer is smaller now. Well, maybe you're back down to $600, but you handled it without taking damage to your credit, your relationships, or your mental health. That's when you realize what you actually bought with that $1,000. You didn't buy stuff. You bought the absence of panic. You bought the ability to have a bad day instead of a bad month. You bought cognitive freedom. And here's the thing that nobody mentions about that first emergency that you successfully handle with your buffer. It changes your relationship with money fundamentally, because for the first time, maybe in your entire adult life, money did what it's actually supposed to do. It solved a problem efficiently without creating 3 new problems in the process. Most people have only ever experienced money as a source of stress. Either you don't have enough, or you're worried about losing what you have, or you're trying to figure out how to get more. Money has always been the problem. But when you use your buffer to handle an actual emergency, money becomes the solution. And that shift in perception is worth more than the dollars themselves. Because suddenly you understand what wealthy people have always understood. Money isn't the goal, it's a tool. And tools are only useful if you have them when you need them. This is why financial advisors always sound insane when they tell broke people to save 6 months of expenses. 6 months? You can barely save $6. The advice feels like being told to climb Everest when you're still figuring out how stairs work. But they're not wrong about the destination. They're just skipping about 15 critical steps about how you actually get there. So let's talk about those steps, because the path from zero to that first $1,000 isn't a straight line. It's more like one of those old Nintendo games where you die constantly, restart from the beginning, and slowly memorize the pattern until you finally make it past the first level. The difference is that in real life, there are no cheat codes, and every time you restart, you're a little more tired than the last time. Step 1 is actually the hardest, and it has nothing to do with money. You have to give yourself permission to be bad at this. You have to accept that you're going to fail multiple times before anything sticks. My first attempt at saving an emergency fund lasted 9 days. 9. I got to $87 before my inspection sticker expired, and I had to pay the fine plus the inspection. Back to 0. Did I feel like a failure? Absolutely. Did I quit? Eventually, no, but I thought about it. The psychological weight of starting over is crushing. It's why so many people never make it past attempt number 2 or 3. They internalize the failure as a personal deficiency rather than a systemic obstacle. But here's what I learned after attempt number 7 or 8. The failures weren't wasted time. Each restart taught me something about where my money was actually going. Each restart revealed another leak I didn't know existed. You can't fix what you can't see, and being broke makes you financially invisible to yourself. You're in survival mode, moving too fast to analyze the pattern. The act of trying to save even when it fails forces you to look at the pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Which brings us to step 2. You need to get unreasonably angry about the poverty tax. I'm talking the kind of anger that overrides your exhaustion, the kind that makes you walk an extra 10 minutes to avoid the ATM fee, the kind that makes you meal prep on Sunday even though you'd rather sleep. This isn't sustainable forever, and it probably isn't healthy long term, but short term, anger is rocket fuel. I knew I'd turned the corner when I started taking convenience fees personally. A $2.50 service charge on a $15 purchase, that's not a fee. That's theft dressed up in a suit, and I refused to pay it. I'd walk out of the store, go home, and order the thing online to avoid the markup. Was this rational? Debatable? Did it work? Absolutely. The system is designed to nickel and dime you into acceptance. Every fee is small enough that fighting it feels petty. But those nickels and dimes add up to hundreds of dollars a year, hundreds of dollars that could be your buffer instead of their profit margin. So get petty, embrace it. Become the person who asks for the fee to be waived. Become the person who switches banks to avoid the monthly charge. Your dignity will recover. Your bank account won't if you don't. Step 3 is understanding the difference between cheap and frugal. Cheap is buying the $8 shoes that fall apart in 2 months. Frugal is buying the $40 shoes on sale for $25 that last 2 years. Cheap costs more. It always does. But when you're broke, you often can't afford to be frugal because frugal requires upfront capital. This is the trap within the trap. You know the better choice. You can do the math. But math doesn't help when you have $12 and the cheap shoes are $8 and the good shoes are $40. You take the $8 shoes and you hate yourself a little for it, and the cycle continues. Breaking this cycle requires what I call strategic deprivation. You have to identify one specific poverty tax that's costing you the most and temporarily make your life worse in other areas to eliminate it. If it's the car burning oil, you eat rice and beans for 6 weeks to afford the repair. If it's the overdraft fees, you cancel the streaming services and the gym membership you're not using anyway. You make the pain acute and temporary instead of chronic and permanent. Nobody wants to hear this. It's not inspirational. It doesn't fit on a motivational poster, but it's the truth. You can't gentle your way out of being broke. You have to get aggressive with it. And here's what happens when you finally hit that $1,000 and manage to keep it there for more than a week. The world doesn't change. You don't suddenly feel rich, but you do feel something you maybe haven't felt in years. You feel possible. Like maybe this isn't your permanent state. Like maybe you're not fundamentally broken at money. Like maybe the system is rigged, but not so rigged that you can't find the exit, that feeling is dangerous in a good way. Because once you believe escape is possible, you start making different choices. You start thinking in terms of months and years instead of just making it to Friday. You start seeing your job differently, not as a life sentence, but as a temporary funding source for your actual life. The buffer doesn't just protect you from emergencies, it protects you from your own desperation. It gives you the luxury of saying no. No to the predatory loan, no to the job that disrespects you, no to the relationship that costs more than it gives. Turns out the most expensive thing about being broke isn't the fees or the interest rates. It's the decisions you make when you don't have options. So build the buffer. Fail at it a few times. Get angry, try again, because on the other side of that, $1,000 isn't wealth, it's agency. And agency is worth every miserable rice and beans dinner it takes to get there. I'll be honest with you. This whole conversation about building a buffer and escaping financial stress sounds clean and linear when you write it out like this. Like, there's a clear path from point A to point B, and if you just follow the steps, you'll make it. Reality is messier. You'll build the buffer, and then life will punch you in the face and take half of it. You'll get back to $800 and feel proud, and then your wisdom teeth will explode and you're back to $200. The trajectory isn't upward, it's chaotic. But chaotic with an overall upward trend is still progress. What I'm trying to tell you is that getting rid of financial stress isn't a destination you arrive at one day and plant a flag. It's more like gradually turning down the volume on a noise you didn't realize was deafening you. Some days it's quieter. Some days it spikes back up. But over time, the average volume decreases, and in that decreasing noise, you start to hear other things. Ideas you couldn't access before, possibilities that seemed absurd when you were in survival mode. A version of yourself that isn't defined by scarcity. The buffer is just money. But what it buys is the mental space to become someone who doesn't need to operate from fear. And that person makes completely different choices than the one reading this right now. That person builds wealth not through discipline or deprivation, but through having enough brain space to see opportunities that panic makes invisible. The $1,000 is the entry fee to that transformation. Everything after that is just compounding clarity. So yeah, save the money. Get mad at the fees, eat the rice and beans, fail and restart and fail again. But understand what you're actually building. You're not building a savings account. You're building a different operating system for your brain, one that runs on possibility instead of panic. And once that system is installed, the money part becomes almost automatic because you're finally thinking clearly enough to see the path forward.